I'd like to invite a very special person to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the GW College Republicans, Kieran Laffey.
Well, that was quite the introduction. Wow, look at this crowd. This is crazy. Look, good evening, everyone. My name is Kieran Laffey, chairman of the GW College Republicans, and I want to personally thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. It means the world to us. I want you to first take a moment and look around this room. What you see is something truly special. A crowd this large, this young, this energized. This was unimaginable just a short time ago, especially on this campus. Yet, here we are, proving that the tide in this country is turning, our culture is shifting, and young Americans are finally beginning to stand up again. And look, I have to say it, just look at that protest outside. Look, we're GW students. If you see a crowd like that protesting an event outside a building, you know what's taking place in that building is going to be a great time. So I want to welcome you to a great time. That brings me to why we're here, because tonight's not about me or a club or anything else. It's about a moment bigger than any of us. As chairman of the largest college Republican chapter in the nation, I feel that responsibility every day. We're standing at a crossroads for our country, a moment where young Americans must step up while others step back. A moment we're standing for free speech, free thought, and honest dialogue is no longer optional, but essential. That idea brings me to a quote I think everyone should remember. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. That quote is not just a lesson from the past, it's a warning to the present. It's a call for courage, a call for action, and a call to do what is right, especially when it is not popular. Because let's be honest, for years, we watch students whisper instead of speak. We watch people hide instead of step forward. We watch too many conform instead of think. But that is changing. Something is shifting on campuses. Something is shifting in this country. People want truth again. They want backbone again. And they want leaders who do not crumble when things get hard. All that brings us to tonight, because we are welcoming a man who has lived by that courage, a man who has refused to fall in line, a man who stood up to the entire Democratic establishment, even as a Kennedy, a man who proved that principle is more important than pressure, a man who proved that doing what is right, even when it is hard, is the right thing to do. He has spent his life fighting for a healthier America, and long before Washington dared to say it, he warned us of that health crisis sweeping our nation. Look, 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease. 1 in 4 children suffer from allergies, and 40% of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. Those numbers are not Democrat or Republican numbers. Those are American numbers. And for years, almost nobody in power had the courage to speak up about this. But someone did, even when it was unpopular, even when it was hard, and even when he had to stand alone. Today, he is showing true leadership by putting politics aside, working with President Trump to make America healthy again. That is courage, that is patriotism, and that is exactly what this cultural moment needs. And look at this room, look at this generation, look at what is happening right here tonight. We are proving that courage still exists, that truth still matters, that young Americans are rising again. And that quote we opened with is not a warning, but a mission to act, a mission to stand up, a mission to defend the founding ideals that built this country. Tonight's a milestone for GW, a milestone for the College Republicans and Turning Point USA, and it's my humble honor to welcome you all tonight. Thank you, and God bless.
Well, let's give another round of applause for Kieran, ladies and gentlemen. That was great. Now, before we invite the person that you are all truly here to see, I would like to invite one more special guest, my co-moderator, Paul Lieb, ladies and gentlemen. Now, for the person you're really here to see, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. How you doing tonight, Mr. Secretary?
I'm good.
Well, we're really happy you're here, and there's obviously a very exciting opportunity. So you ready? You ready for the questions? All right, here we go. Well, not to start off with something too insane, but in just the past year alone, we've unfortunately seen a witnessing alarm of rise in political violence, from the assassination of Charlie Kirk to the several attempts on President Trump's life, and even the killing of a former Minnesota House Speaker. Even on college campuses today, students face growing hostility, intimidation, and in some cases, threats of violence simply just for expressing their beliefs, the same way Charlie Kirk did. How did someone like Charlie Kirk have an effect on you in the passing of him?
Well, I mean, his passing impacted me a lot. He was, I had become close with Charlie over the 3 previous years. And I didn't agree with him on a lot of issues, particularly when I first met him. We grew closer and closer over time. But we were both advocates of the First Amendment and free speech absolutists. And, you know, you had to respect Charlie because he believed in certain things. He was able to defend them. Most of all, he believed in open dialogue and free speech. And you talked about the violence. I think ultimately there's a lot of reasons for violence in our society today. But I think that the thing that we can do something about is to open up more dialogue. People become violent when they cannot express themselves anymore. And they can't express themselves because they're censored, because they're silenced, or because of the means of expression. The media is controlled and will not venture outside of certain Overton windows so that certain subjects become taboo and people are canceled, people are silenced. And that, you know, when you can't express yourself, that's when you go to violence. I think what Charlie was doing, and that's why I believe so strongly and felt so aligned with him, is that he was trying to open up that dialogue. And he always wanted to speak with the people who disagreed with him most. And I think that that was a really admirable virtue of his, that he had the confidence to meet people on the battlefield of ideas. And you know, the whole magic of democracy is a very sloppy system. It's filled with inefficiencies. And the one advantage that it has over a dictatorships are much more efficient. You only have one person making decisions. And you can move very, very quickly, and there's no process. And so they have an advantage, but the advantage that democracies have is that the policies that are enacted in democracy are policies that have triumphed in the marketplace of ideas. And that's what gives us our advantage. And when we shut down debate, and we shut down conversation, open, the free flow of information is the water, it's the soil, it's the oxygen, and it's the sunlight for democracy. And when you shut it down, democracy will wither and die.
I think Charlie Kirk was able to really capture the youth spirit, I mean, like no one else can. And I think you tap into that as much as anybody else. I mean, it's incredible. What do you think about the movement, the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again movement, resonates with the young crowd so well in a way that Charlie Kirk was able to do just the same as you were?
Yeah, I think that young people see, it's strange because people my age know what a healthy person's supposed to look like. And they kind of, it's like the frog in the boiling water. You leave the frog and you slowly bring the water to the boil and the frog will just sit there and simmer. With kids are growing up today and they know something is wrong. And when I started talking about it, when Charlie started talking about it, a lot of kids your age said, yeah, this is not right. And I've sensed that there was something wrong for a long time. But he's actually putting his finger on it. And one of you mentioned before that, 40% of Americans, 38% of teens are now diabetic or pre-diabetic. And when I was a kid, a typical pediatrician would see one case of juvenile diabetes over a 40 or 50-year career. I never knew anybody with diabetes. I never heard anybody with diabetes. And I had 11 siblings, I had 70 first cousins, and all the schools I went to, I never knew anybody with diabetes. And today, that same pediatrician, 1 out of every 3 kids who comes to his office door is diabetic or pre-diabetic. In 1970, they did the biggest epidemiological study in the history of the world. And they were looking for kids with autism in the state of Wisconsin, and they knew what autism looked like. It had been around a while, since the 1930s. And they found in it, they looked at every child between an 8-year-old child in Wisconsin. It was 900,000 kids they looked at. And they found that the incidence of autism was 0.7 per 10,000, so less than 1 in 10,000. Today, the incident is 1 in every 31 kids, 1 in every 20 boys. And it's actually a lot worse than that because some states do a lot better at collecting data, and California is the best. And in California, the autism rate is 1 in every 19 kids and 1 in every 12.5 boys. So, for some reason, the adults of my generation have kind of let this happen and have normalized it and said, oh, there's, no problem here. But I think kids your age are looking around and saying, why am I sick? Why do I have chronic disease? Why do I have food allergies? Nobody knew what a food allergy was when I was a kid. I never knew anybody with a peanut allergy. And there's no medical literature on it. It wasn't even in the medical literature because it was just unheard of. And all of a sudden, beginning around 1989, kids started getting allergic to peanuts. And now I think it's 1 in every 13 kids has a peanut allergy or a food allergy. And so I think people of your generation, we're seeing this happen. We're seeing that your generation is particularly affected by it. And with neurological diseases, autoimmune diseases, allergic diseases, and that there's a different view of what could be happening in this country. We need to figure out what's causing it and eliminate it.
So last week you held your MAHA summit with Vice President Vance, and you underscored that MAHA is not just a wellness initiative, but a movement to reform how government approaches public health and scientific authority. And how do you see this mission of reform connecting both with your broader goals of putting country over party, but specifically also, like, how do you see it connecting with people like students, with the younger generation?
Well, I think there's two ways to answer that question. One is, what are our public health objectives? And to me, what I want to do as HHS secretary is a couple of things. One is to have gold standard science. The science has been captured by the pharmaceutical industry and private industry, and also by regulators who don't want to be questioned. And so the scientific journals are compromised because the pharmaceutical companies pay all their expenses and all of their profits. The medical schools are compromised by payments from the pharmaceutical industry and from NIH. And all the institutions, the AMA, the AAP, are all now captured agencies. They're promoting not public health, but they're promoting the mercantile interests of pharmaceutical companies and other companies within the medical industry. And we have a sick care system as a result rather than a health care system. All of those institutions make money from keeping Americans sick. And so there's a couple of things that we need to do. We need to have gold standard science, and we need to make sure that the journals are actually publishing gold standard science that is uncontaminated by conflicts of interest. And then we need to give people choice. I don't think that we should have a nanny state approach and that we should tell you, you shouldn't do, you can't have this vape if you want it, or you can't have whatever you want. We need to tell you what the risks are, what the benefits are, and then let Americans make their own choices. If you make bad choices, you may have to pay a little bit more of your share of the healthcare costs of our country. We need to design a system that does what free market capitalism is supposed to do, which is incentivize good behavior and punish bad behavior. And that should just be part of our system, and that's always been part of our system of democracy and free market capitalism. And then we need to realign these perverse incentives so that people can make money by keeping you healthy. If they get paid by keeping you healthy, they don't get paid by asking for another MRI or another CAT scan or another blood test. They get paid if you get better. And in that way, we could make it so that people do well by doing good, rather than the system that we have now, which encourages everybody to keep us all sick. I say, one other way of answering that question is that the medical system reflects the values of the society as a whole, and they're intertwined with each other. And medicine is very conveniently a tool of control by totalitarian systems. And we saw this during COVID when we had an illness, and it was used as a crisis to shut down our constitutional rights. They shut down our, President Biden, 37 hours after he took the oath of office, his White House was twisting Mark Zuckerberg's arm to censor me and to censor a lot of other people, but I was the first one that they censored, and they removed my account from Instagram, and they slow walked all of my other accounts. They shadow banned them. But as soon as they figured out that they could get rid of freedom of speech, they went after all of our other rights. The founders, Madison Adams, put freedom of speech in the First Amendment because they knew all of the other rights depended on it. a government that can silence its opponents has license for any kind of atrocity. And as soon as they figured out that we were going to put up with the censorship, they closed all the churches. They got rid of freedom of worship. They closed all the churches for a year in our country. And they kept the liquor stores open as, essential businesses. They kept Walmart open. And then they went after the other right in the First Amendment, which is the freedom of assembly. They put down social distancing regulations so we couldn't assemble. We couldn't get together. And then they went after the Fifth Amendment, which they closed down 3.5 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. They went after the Fourth Amendment, prohibition against unwarranted searches and seizures, by making you show your medical records before you could leave your home, before you could enter a government building, before you could go on an airline. They went after the Seventh Amendment right to jury trials. The Seventh Amendment says no American shall be denied the right of a trial before a jury of his peers in cases or controversies exceeding $25. That's all it says. There is no pandemic exception. And the framers of the Constitution knew all about epidemics. There were 2 devastating epidemics during the Revolutionary War, and there were dozens of epidemics between the end of the war and the ratification of the Constitution. They killed tens of thousands of people, yellow fever, malaria, smallpox, etc. So they knew all about them. They didn't put an exception in the Constitution. And yet, all of a sudden, we had 250 years of history of that Constitution, and in 1 year, the entire thing was dismantled. They said anybody who damages you or injures you in the course of providing a countermeasure, you can't sue them, no matter how negligent they are, no matter how reckless they are, no matter how wanton they are or malicious, you cannot sue them. They wiped out all of the essential rights in 1 year. And that, we have to be wary of in the future, that health crises are not used to attack our democracy. Our Constitution was written for hard times. It wasn't written for easy times. It was written for the times when people want to give away their rights in exchange for security. That's when you need the Constitution to protect all of us.
It's funny that the MAHA movement has become so polarizing recently, and I truly don't get it, because I think you are such a figure that all of us, or a lot of us in the crowd, and I know everyone on stage here, looks at you as a figure that really pushes young people to just better themselves, to make themselves healthier. How can we bridge this divide across the nation, especially in the health department, to just push for a happier and healthier America?
Well, the answer, I think, is that I don't think the movement itself is polarizing. I mean, I may be seen as a polarizing figure, but I don't think the movement itself is polarizing. I think we just live in a time of polarization. And one of the reasons I believe this is I've gone to the governor's conference and met with both the Republican and Democratic governors and met individually with them. And the Democratic governors invariably say, I love everything that you're doing. I want to do, the SNAP waivers. I want to get rid of the petroleum-based food dyes. I want to make sure our kids have whole foods in their schools, that we have it in our prisons, that we give it to the military, that mothers have access to baby formula that doesn't have arsenic in it, that doesn't have mercury or lead in it. And they want the same thing, but they also say, I can't call myself MAHA because violence. I think what Charlie was doing, and that's why President Trump put his arm around me strongly and felt so aligned with him, is that he was trying to open up that dialogue. And he always wanted to speak with the people who disagreed with him most. And I think that was a really admirable virtue of his, that he had the confidence to meet people on the battlefield of ideas. And the whole magic of democracy is a very sloppy system. It's filled with inefficiencies. And the one advantage that it has over a dictatorship is much more efficient. You only have one person make decisions. And you can move very, very quickly, and there's no process. And so they have an advantage, but the advantage that democracies have is that the policies that are enacted in democracy are policies that have triumphed in the marketplace of ideas. And that's what gives us our advantage. And when we shut down debate, and we shut down conversation, open the free flow of information is the water, it's the soil, it's the oxygen, and it's the sunlight. These were all democratic issues, and yet they cannot, because of the partisan nature of politics in this country, they can't give you a pat on the back if you do something even that they like. And I realized this many years ago when I saw the Democrats had hated NAFTA for so long, and then President Trump said that he hated NAFTA, and all of a sudden the Democrats love NAFTA. And I was like, oh, this is how it works now, that President Trump is actually not only creating the platform for the Republican Party, but he's creating the platform for the Democratic Party. Because whatever he says, they have to do the opposite. And, when I grew up, the Democrats were the anti-war party, but when President Trump said he was against the war in Ukraine, they became the pro-war party. And now for my issue, it was a Democratic issue to get the dyes out of food and have SNAP waivers, et cetera. But now it's a Republican issue because President Trump said that, because President Trump put his arm around me and endorsed this issue and said, we're going to end chronic disease in this country and make America healthy. We should all be applauding that. But it's the partisan nature of our politics, and I think that is a big threat to our country. And, that kind of partisanship, that tribalism.
Well, speaking of partisanship, you've been one of the most unconventional figures in modern American politics. Recently, you challenged, in the last election, you challenged both major parties and appealed to voters across ideological lines, running as an independent. What does your campaign's success say about the current state of the two-party system, and do you believe it can represent the American people effectively?
I think it's hard to have a third party in this country, and having now been in the government for a while, I think it would, if I had won the presidency as an independent, that it would have been very, very hard for me to govern. I think President Trump has gotten more done than any other president in this period of time. But he's done that. He's done it because he controls both parties in the House and in the Senate. He controls both houses, and because of his personal power, that he can actually cause people elections. That he's able to whip both houses into shape. So he was able to pass whether you like the legislation or not. He was able to do probably more than at least any president since Franklin Roosevelt's first term, and arguably more than that. I mean, the tariffs are, whether you like them or not, it's just an extraordinary change, and all of the things that we're doing right now are so dramatic changes in the trajectory of the past, and I don't think any other person could have done that. Now, I don't think the two-party system is inherently flawed. I think the current system is badly flawed because it's not really a two-party system anymore. At least the Democratic Party is controlled by this narrow elite. And, and I can tell you from my own experience, my father ran against an incumbent president of the United States from his own party, Lyndon Johnson, and he had a fair fighting field. And he drove Johnson out of the race. And, he would have won the race. He was on his way to the convention to win when he was killed. My uncle Ted Kennedy in 1980 ran against an incumbent president of his own party, Jimmy Carter. And I ran the southern states for him during that campaign. And he ended up losing, but he had a fair fight, and he almost won. And he won a lot of primaries. And so when I ran, I got up to about 25% of the vote, and the Democrats started closing down the primaries, making rules so that I could not, even if I won the primary, I couldn't get delegates. They made a rule that after I went to campaign in New Hampshire, they made a rule that any Democratic candidate who steps foot into the state of New Hampshire cannot get any delegates from that state. So they started doing that, and then when my numbers kept improving, they started suing me. And they ended up suing me in 12 states to try to keep me off the ballot, and then they sued me in 12 states to keep me on the ballot when I endorsed Trump. And so it was using litigation, and they didn't just sue me. They sued Dean Phillips, they sued Marianne Williams, they sued President Trump, and you remember when they won the lawsuits that stopped him from being on the ballot in Colorado, which I thought I was running against President Trump at that time, and I said, that's not fair. Americans should get to vote for the person. This shouldn't be decided in court. And my party was the party of voting rights when I grew up. My father and my uncle were all fighting to make sure every American had a right to vote. So I was in a Democratic Party where they decided they wanted President Biden, and who was not competent to serve. But it was a narrow group of people who made that decision, and that anybody who ran against them would simply not be allowed to run. And that kind of two-party system is not going to work, because I think it just makes people angry. And I don't think it's good for the Democratic Party, and I don't think it's morally right, and I don't think it's good for our democracy.
As we all know, and you've already mentioned this a couple times now, but you've come from one of the most influential political families in American history. And when you decided to run outside of this two-party structure, what lessons from watching your family's campaigns over the years really proved to be true, and which of you has really stuck with you over this time, especially in the political atmosphere that we currently encounter?
Well, I kind of answered that question before, because I talked about how I ran originally. I was prompted to run because I thought the Democrats had lost their bearings. I thought, the Democratic Party is now the party of war instead of the party of peace. It was the party of free speech, now it's the party of censorship. It was the party of closed borders. When I was a kid, the Democrats, I worked with Cesar Chavez for the last 10 years of his life, from 1983 to 1993, a very, very close political ally of my father, and I was working with him on pesticide issues. He had two issues at that time, and I was a pallbearer in his funeral. He had two issues, and one was pesticide use, which was hurting farm workers, and the other issue was closing the border. Because at that time, it was the Republicans who wanted an open border, because that dropped the price of the cost of labor. So traditionally, the Republicans wanted open borders because of lower labor costs, and the Democrats wanted to close the border. So, okay, that's where I had come from. So now we were in like opposite land. And my uncle, the Democrats were the party of women's sports. My uncle Ted Kennedy wrote Title IX because women had to have their own sports. And now the Democratic Party was, okay, but men get to play them too. And they became the party of big ag, of big chemical, of big food, of big pharma. And and they just seemed to be the opposite of the party that I grew up with. And that's why I ran. And then when I ran and was not allowed to run, and it became more and more obvious to me that there was a level of corruption that was just not good for our country, and it was terrible for the Democratic Party. I don't think it's sustainable, and I hope they learn a lesson from what happened the last time.
So this is our last question before we go to the Q&A portion of this, but I think it's a good one to end off on. And you've been a part of this administration, a very memorable one. What is one experience that you've had, a fun experience that really just is with you, especially with Donald Trump, maybe himself?
Funny experiences?
Yeah.
I mean, every day is like a comedy show, honestly. And the cabinet meetings are... President Trump is hilarious. And he's funny, he's irreverent. People love him because he's authentic. He says exactly what's on his mind, and my wife says about him that he's just incredibly comfortable in his own skin. And as a result, he says a lot of funny things. But the cabinet, this is probably the funniest cabinet in American history. There's a lot of funny people. I was talking to to JD the other day. I did one of these fireside chats with him at the Maha thing, and I said to him, "Who's the funniest cabinet member?" And both of us agreed it's Marco. And at every cabinet meeting, he says something that makes everybody just crumble in hysterics, but again and again. And I can't, I'll just give you an example. And this isn't that great an example, but one time Elon was, this is before they let the press in. We have a private cabinet meeting first. And Elon Musk was was going through all of his Doge data. And he was saying, we found 250,000 Americans over the age of 124 who are collecting, collecting Social Security, who are collecting workers' compensation. And Marco said, well, in their defense, it's pretty hard to find a job when you're over 124. And then I told this story the other day with Marco that President Trump came into one of the cabinet meetings after he visited Hawaii with President Putin, and he had a big poster board with a picture of him, and he's very tall, and President Putin standing next to him, and President Putin came up about here. They were standing outside at the conference hall in Hawaii, and he said to us, you know what I said to President Putin? He said, Vladimir, I've had it up to here with you. And he said, Putin really laughed at that. But I saw President Trump the other day when he was with the Syrian president. Anyway, he took some perfume he has a back room with all this swag in it, with towels, with his logo and hats, and he has a perfume back there, a Trump perfume, and he brought it out and he squirted some on the Syrian president, and he said, I'm gonna get some of this for your wife. And he said, how many wives do you have? And the Syrian president said, one. He said, I never know with you guys. Anyway, it's a lot of entertainment, and and then I think we've gotten more done than probably any administration in history.
Well, that was truly a story. Several stories, actually. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open the floor. I think you guys have heard enough from Paul and I asking our questions. So now, in honor of Charlie Kirk, and obviously for the reason that we're here, we're opening the floor to you guys so that you can ask the Secretary right here live your questions. So if you have a question, come up. And if you disagree with the Secretary in any respect, come to the front of the line, please. We'd love to hear your questions.
Speak on me then.
Is this off? And we're going to ask, please make the questions direct so we can have everyone go. If you disagree, get to the front of the line. Direct questions, please. Thank you.
You know, hold it. Go tell me when you're ready. I know.
All right. Let's get this started. Sir, if you could share your name and where you're from.
All right. Hi, Secretary Kennedy. My name is Ethan Fitzgerald. I'm from San Diego, California. I'm a master's student here at GW. So I want to start with saying, though we may disagree with each other on many issues, I'm here today because I care deeply about our nation's mental health crisis and ensuring that young people receive the necessary support they desperately need. At GW, a group of students are already working to push Congress to pass existing bipartisan mental health legislation that would expand access to mental health resources on college campuses as well as nationwide. I'm happy to give you some specific bills, but I have two questions for you. First, will you join GW students in supporting that effort? And second, what more could you be doing at HHS to help Americans get the access to mental health support they need and deserve? Thank you.
I don't want to be a spoiler, but we're announcing a major mental health initiative that is all about access next week. So, but I'm not familiar with the legislation that you're talking about, so I can't endorse it without understanding it. I endorse the principle. We have a mental health crisis in this country. My family has been touched with it. You know, I was myself a heroin addict for 14 years. I've been in recovery for 43 years. And and particularly, you know, the issue of addiction is very important to me, and access to services can be life or death. We need to make sure that, you know, addicts go through these cycles where they hit a nadir, a bottom, and for a few hours or a day or two, they're willing to get help. And that if help is accessible at that moment, it can save their lives. And if it isn't, then, you know, they're a ransom to fortune. And so, you know, that's one issue, but it is a crisis. We have your generation, particularly, you know, suicide is now the highest cause of death, and we're losing a whole generation to addiction and mental health illness, and it's not necessary. It's a priority for us. Thanks.
Hello, Secretary Kennedy. It's great to meet you. My name's Ben. I'm from the Republic of Ireland, and I'm with the Turning Point chapter here. So I just wanted to congratulate you on everything you've been doing with your MAHA movement, and I wanted to ask, what's your ideal end goal for this movement?
To end the chronic disease crisis, to make America the healthiest country in the world like it was when I was a kid. the most robust people. I said this in when I endorsed President Trump. I said, a healthy person has 1,000 dreams, and a sick person just has one. And we've got a whole generation now of kids who are sick, and they have only one dream. And we want to give them the American dream, which is thousands of dreams about their future, their aspirations, fulfilling the promises, the talents that God gave them. And for many of them, their lives are going to be consumed in the struggle with pain, with chronic pain and chronic disease. And we've got to end that. We've got to identify the exposures, get rid of them, and then figure out treatments.
Thank you for calling tonight, Mr. Secretary. My name is Gavi Cantor. I'm a junior from New York City studying international business and political science. And my question is that as HHS Secretary, you've promoted the need to address various health crises, such as obesity, allergies, and other chronic diseases. My question for you is, why should you lead this fight and not a doctor who holds a degree and who spent their career studying these illnesses? Wouldn't their past knowledge and expertise be more beneficial, especially at a time where this is very important to attack?
I didn't hear your question. Just let me listen to his question. I heard the introduction, but what was the question again?
My question is, why should you be the person to lead this fight? Not saying that you shouldn't, but why do you think you should be this person to lead the fight against all these diseases, instead of a doctor, per se, who has past knowledge and experience in the fields?
Well, I'll point out this. I'm the 27th HHS Secretary, and of the 26 that preceded me, only 2 have been doctors. And there's never been a doctor appointed by the Democrats. The only 2 doctors were appointed by Republicans. The people who have been running HHS up till now have failed us. The agencies have failed us. We're now the sickest country in the world. We spend 2 to 3 times what people spend in Europe for health care. And we spend almost as much as all the countries in the world combined. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of the top 79 nations in the world. We have the highest infant mortality rates. We've lost 10 years in longevity to Europe. We have cancer rates are exploding. Diabetes, we're leading the world. And obesity, we're leading the world. So whatever they were doing in the past was wrong. During COVID, we had 19% of the COVID deaths in this country globally. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. We literally had the worst record of any country in the world. Whoever was running it should have been fired, because we did worse than any nation. So, I don't have a medical degree, but I've spent 40 years reading science and litigating it and writing books on it. I've written 6 books on public health. And I'm an advocate, and I know how to change things, and I'm not scared to disrupt things. And these agencies need to be disrupted. They need to change their direction. My job is not to protect the bureaucracy. My job is to protect public health. And when I leave this agency, it's going to be much better equipped to protect public health than when I found it.
Hello. Hi, I'm a student from Georgetown University. Thank you for coming here to speak to students in DC. I want to ask you specifically, given the scale of your MAHA agenda, from managing processed foods to cleaning up environmental toxins, obviously many voters want clarity over outcome. So in that case, as you know from common sense, that population health indicators occur over decades, not election cycles. So after 4 years, in 2029, looking back to this conversation, what tangible health metrics would you like to use to measure success?
There's a lot of tangible health metrics. One is that every American, a lot of it is in the agency of CMS, which is Medicaid and Medicare, that we've gotten rid of the fraud, or 90% of it, that Americans can get prior authorization, or that they know before they leave their doctor's office how much the procedure is going to cost and whether their insurance company is going to pay for it. We're already doing that. I want to make sure that every American has access to their medical records on their cell phones. I want to make sure that people have access to remote care in remote parts of this country, that they have access to AI nurses and the best possible care. Most of all, I want to make sure that we have begun to end the chronic disease epidemic, and particularly in the youngest generation of kids. By the time I leave office, you're going to see a generation, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, where you're seeing a lot less ADHD, you're seeing a lot less autism, you're seeing fewer neurological disorders, ASD, ADD, sleep disorders, language delays, tics, Tourette's syndrome, narcolepsy, fewer autoimmune diseases, fewer allergic diseases. And I believe that we're going to achieve that. And then, that we get more drugs to market per year than any other administration in history. I think we're on track to do that. And that we're running an agency that's completely focused on public health rather than profits for the pharmaceutical industry.
Hello, I'm Ryan. I'm a freshman here at GW. First of all, thank you so much for being here and speaking with us today. Obviously, you're very concerned with the current medical crisis in our country. You talked a lot about it during the regular Q&A section, and I agree with a lot of your concerns and desires for an ambitious medical campaign. However, we also see at the same time that the administration is cutting a lot of funding for medical research and firing a lot of people within the medical department. So how are you able to balance this policy of wanting to downsize government while also having this policy to have an ambitious medical campaign?
We're not cutting science. We're not cutting research. We're not cutting research. Now, there were some studies paused during the rifts, so you may mistake those for us cutting them, but all of those studies are renewed. And there were no clinical trials abandoned. All of the clinical trials are continuing to be funded. We're cutting bureaucrats. We had 42 communications departments. We had 40 IT departments, and most of them were using computer systems that were incompatible with each other. I think we had over 50 HIV programs, and we consolidated them. We didn't cut the research, we consolidated them. So if you look at CNN or read the New York Times, you'll read that we cut programs. And I keep telling reporters, show me a study that we cut. And if we cut a study on child health, on cancer, on pediatric tumors, whatever it was, and I will make sure it gets restored. Because my agencies, Marty McGarry and Jay Bhattacharya, are telling me we did not cut any studies. And I keep asking reporters who come up to me and say, oh, you cut all this science. I keep saying, tell me the study that you're worried about, because I will restore it if we cut a study. Now, we cut $1 billion worth of DEI studies. And we cut, I think, about $600 million worth of autism genetic studies. And this is what they did, okay? What they did at NIH, because they didn't want to study the environmental causes of autism. Because of whatever they study, they're going to run up against some powerhouse. So they said, we're going to take all the money that Congress gave us to study autism, and we're going to find the genetic cause of autism. Well, guess what? Genes do not cause epidemics. They may provide a vulnerability, but you need an environmental toxin. And it's the same thing as if in the last 60 years, they had been studying the genetic cause of lung cancer and refused to do a single study on cigarettes. That's what they were doing. It was all a big scam. Now we're taking the money away from those hoax studies, and we're putting it in real science so that we can find the causes of it.
Hi, my name is Josh. I'm a sophomore here at GW. I was curious, I know you in the past were the chair of the Children's Health Defense nonprofit organization, a organization that has believed that vaccines are a contributing cause of autism, despite many studies on hundreds of thousands of children showing otherwise, with the exception of studies done by frauds like Andrew Wakefield with a handful of subjects, whereas with studies with hundreds of thousands of subjects, they find no correlation at all to autism. Do you still agree with the claims by Children's Health Defense, or have you distanced themselves now, or do you, being the chair of the Health and Human Services for the U.S., now maybe are more educated on that and do not believe that anymore?
I believe what I've always believed is that we need to study the cause of autism. Now, you say that autism has, in fact, the potential for vaccines to cause autism has been studied. In fact, only one vaccine has ever been studied, the MMR vaccine. The 20 doses of the 7 vaccines that are given during the first year of life, the DTP, the Hib, the hepatitis B, the pneumococcal vaccines, and the polio vaccines have never been studied. And in fact, Congress, when it passed the 1986 Vaccine Act, said you've got to study the DTP vaccine. He directed the HHS secretary to study the DTP vaccine to see whether or not it's caused autism. That study, so that was 86, it's now 25. So that's 40 years ago? 40 years ago. And those studies have never been done. The only studies that were done were MMR studies, and they were all epidemiological studies, which is not, you can't prove causation with an epidemiological study anyway. And in 2017, the Institute of Medicine looked at all of the MMR studies, and they threw out all but 4 of them. So, and the 4 that were left were all epidemiological studies, and none of them did what you would want to do if you actually wanted the answer, which is to compare health outcomes in a vaccinated group against health outcomes in an unvaccinated group. That's what we need to do, and those are the studies we're doing now. They have never been done. The people who told you that have been lying to you. They've been lying.
Hello, I'm a student at GW, and I wanted to know more info about what your beliefs were on the deregulation of the agricultural industry, and maybe whether that deregulation should actually be a indicator of focusing on the system that benefits more profit instead of people.
If what?
Sorry. Basically what I'm asking is, do you think that the system in general should be changed from caring about profit motive to caring about the well-being of people by actually doing regulation of these agricultural systems instead of deregulating them?
Well, are you talking about agricultural chemicals?
Yes.
So, I've done a lot of litigation in that area. I, did the litigation against Monsanto. It's been an issue that, I've been deeply concerned with for many years. It's not an area that I directly regulate as a HHS secretary. That is done by USDA. And so we're doing research at my agency on those chemicals, but I don't have direct authority over regulating them.
Hi, I'm currently getting my degree in public health from George Washington University. One of the primary things that we focus on are social determinants of health. There is extensive data that shows that factors such as someone's economic status, systemic and medical racism, and various environmental factors influence and predict someone's health outcome to a far higher extent than someone's necessarily personal action. And so I'm wondering how we can find out and solve the problem of making America healthy if the federal government has banned terms including health disparity, race, and accessibility from grant and research proposals when we know these are the things that we must be looking into in order to solve these problems.
What we do at our agency now is we're focusing on science. And if you're poor or if you're rich and you smoke cigarettes, you have a 1 in 5 chance of dying of lung cancer. And so we're trying to give people the right information, and it's for all Americans. It's not for Americans who are one color, another religion, or one religion. It is objective science. We're trying to get information in front of the American people so that they can make good choices of their own lives. And, I run the Indian Health Services. I run the Head Start program. We are deeply concerned. We're changing we just got rid of mercury dental amalgams on the reservations. We're ending that. We're changing the food in Head Start, which is all processed foods right now. You go in there and everything comes in a package. We're going to give those kids good food. I don't need somebody telling me that they're going to get sicker because they're poorer or because they're blacker or browner than somebody else. I know that processed food is going to kill them. And it's killing poor people at a much higher rate because they live in food deserts. We know that. We don't need a study to show that. We want good information, and we want to give it to all Americans because we are all in this together. And we all need to get rid of the processed food and make sure every American has access to good, wholesome, whole food that comes from the ground to the water, the air.
Good evening, Secretary Kennedy. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Abigail Sullivan, and I'm the president of a chapter at Patrick Henry College, TPUSA there. My question is a little bit on a different side of accomplishing your goals as secretary for your term. Will you be able to do these things, and how can we as the younger generation carry on with these goals in the days ahead for what is coming next through this next administration, and how can we practically educate ourselves and implement these goals in our own lives?
I didn't understand the question, sorry. I didn't understand the question.
That's okay. So with all of your goals that you want to accomplish practically, we want to see all of those things come to pass. What are things that you're doing that will carry forward through the generations, and how can we take that torch up for the next generation in passing those things along?
Well, you know what, I said, what I'm trying to do is make sure that we have good information, that we have good science, gold standard science, so that we can base our policies on that science. I want to do the science on ultra-processed foods. There's a tremendous amount of indication that ultra-processed foods are the major driver for chronic disease in this country. It is criminal that we don't have the science already on that. We've known this for many, many years. We've known that, we have these epidemics in our country, like allergy epidemics, autism epidemics. Why don't we know what's causing them? There's no excuse for that. This is very basic science. And when we find those things out and identify the exposures that are causing these injuries to our children, then your generation will have the ability, they'll have the information and the ability to go out and say, we got to get rid of these. And that's half the battle, is figuring out what's causing all the injury. The other half of the battle is challenging these vested interests who are not going to want us messing with their economic models.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, my name is Jacob. I'm with the TPUSA PHC chapter. I'm from Northeast Tennessee, but thank you for coming out today. I appreciate it. But I had a question.
Did you say the CPU chapter?
TPUSA chapter.
Oh, okay.
From Patrick Henry College. But one thing I was curious about is, as a kid with a lot of food allergies that aren't covered by the major 9 FDA allergens, specifically with natural and artificial flavors, where that's kind of such a broad catch-all. Have you considered any policy changes at looking into making that more specific, so people who can't look at the specific allergens contained in those foods can see exactly what's in those foods?
You're talking about allergens that are listed on the labels?
Yes, on the labels. So when you have the labels, sometimes you'll see artificial or natural flavors, and in those flavors, there's a bunch of different food additives and things, but they don't get specifically labeled. So people if you aren't in the major 9 food allergens, to see contains contains for example, you won't know specifically what's in those additives. So I'm curious if you've ever considered looking into that.
I haven't looked at that yet. I'm happy to hear more about it. If you want to, get in touch with me at the agency, or Stephanie at HHS.gov, and I will get that and I'll take a look at it. But it's not something that I've given a lot of thought to. I've given a lot of thought to allergies, but not to labeling.
Thank you.
I think that's it for public questions. But look, we've covered a very...
Okay, we'll do one more. One more.
Secretary, thank you for coming out tonight, but I have a really important question here. There are young people in this room. Everyone here is, I believe, under the age of 30, I want to assume. But the reality is that there are 2 key epidemics that are impacting young people: mass shootings, opioid epidemic. It used to be automobile accidents, but that is now off the charts. It doesn't really matter anymore. It's opioids and mass shootings. Opioid epidemic, you have OxyContin being manufactured, still legally allowed to be taking OxyContin, which has the same addictiveness as heroin. Mass shooting epidemic is the leading cause of death for people our age. We have the most guns per person in America. I don't think most Americans believe that we should take away guns, but we should be regulating them better. We should be regulating opioids better. Why are Republicans in Congress not advocating for legislation that will address their constituencies? That's the opioid epidemic impacts rural communities. Mass shootings impact rural communities. Why won't Republicans pass legislation that address these most pivotal issues that impacts everyone in this room?
I mean, I can't speak for the Republicans in Congress. I can speak for my agency. And, you know, my agency is taking a lot of steps right now to, first of all, to approve new
Mass shooting epidemic is the leading cause of death for people our age. We have the most guns per person in America. I don't think most Americans believe that we should take away guns, but we should be regulating them better. We should be regulating opioids better. Why are Republicans in Congress not advocating for legislation that will address their constituencies? That's the opioid epidemic impacts rural communities. Mass shootings impact rural communities. Why won't Republicans pass legislation that address these most pivotal issues that impacts everyone in this room?
I mean, I can't speak for the Republicans in Congress. I can speak for my agency. And, you know, my agency is taking a lot of steps right now to, first of all, to approve new non-opioid, non-addictive painkiller, a new painkiller that was just developed, and we're now approving it for Medicaid, Medicare. And I think that that's going to help a lot. And, you know, we're also issuing the proper warnings to doctors about, and I think right now it's more difficult to get oxycodone than it was in the past. Before, they were giving it out like candy, and we've changed a lot of that culture at FDA. And that was directly as a result of FDA corruption, of FDA tweaking the label to say that it was not addictive, which was a lie, and they knew it was a lie at that time. And the guy who tweaked it then went to work for Purdue Pharma. So it was, you know, this is another example of agency corruption. In terms of the mass shootings, we're looking at, you know, why do we have this epidemic of mass shootings? Is it really to do with the proliferation of guns? Because when I was a kid, we had roughly the same amount of guns per capita, and in fact, in some of the schools that I went to, there were gun clubs, and kids would come to school with their guns, and nobody worried that they were going to start shooting people. So the question is, why in the 1980s, and there are other countries that have, let's say, comparable number of guns. For example, Switzerland, which has comparable number of guns to ours, but their last mass shooting in Switzerland was 23 years ago. And we have a mass shooting every 23 hours. What is happening in this country? In all of human history, there's never been a time when a stranger would walk into a schoolroom or into a movie theater and start shooting strangers. Why did that start happening in the 1970s and only in this country? And you know, one of the things that we're looking at is SSRIs and other psychiatric drugs that have these black box warnings on them, and that began proliferating in lockstep with the school shootings and with the mass shootings. You know, I'm trying to look at this in a rational, objective way and say what changed. It wasn't the proliferation of guns. We've always had guns. Something changed about human behavior, and it happened here, where we've got 20% of the population now taking these drugs. And the drugs, you know, in their clinical trials, they saw suicidal and homicidal effects. There's black box warnings on them saying may cause suicidal or homicidal ideation. We're now doing massive studies on this issue to try to figure out why it is that all these shootings are happening here and never happened before.
Well, our discussions have varied very wide today, and we're obviously thankful for everyone who showed out tonight. But what we proved tonight is that Charlie Kirk's legacy will live on through open debate and freedom of speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight would not have been made possible without all you in the audience. Tonight would not have been made possible without the incredible team that we have here, both at our Foggy Bottom Turning Point chapter, those that flew out from Arizona from headquarters, the Secretary's team, and those that came from all over. And of course, Secretary Kennedy, none of this would have been here without you. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.